Pokémon Emerald Seaglass is a ROM hack for the GBA developed by Nemo622, based on Pokémon Emerald and set in the Hoenn region. But what makes it immediately distinctive is its defining concept, a complete visual overhaul of the entire game in a Game Boy Color inspired art style. Before we get into the review, there are a couple of biases which I have, which are worth disclosing up front to you guys. Hoenn is one of my favourite regions in the entire series, and Pokémon Emerald is actually the first Pokémon game I ever bought with my own money. Every game before it was handed down to me from my brother, which I also loved as well, but Emerald holds a particular place for me. Bear that in mind as you listen and watch the rest of the review. Graphics and presentation. This is the most important section of most ROM hack reviews, but it is especially important here because the entire identity of Emerald Seaglass as a ROM hack is built around its complete visual overhaul. On paper, taking a Generation 3 game and redesigning it in a Generation 2 Game Boy Color art style sounds counterintuitive and even like a downgrade. That assumption could not be further from the truth. The visuals are absolutely stunning. The art style has been reworked across the board, including the overworld, character sprites, battle backgrounds, user interface and menus. Every element of the game has been touched, and the result is something that feels like an entirely new experience rather than a simple reskin. Even mundane early encounters like battling Zigzagoon or Poochyena to rescue Professor Birch feel like a novel phenomenon. That is a remarkable achievement considering I have been playing Pokemon games for over 2 decades and have revisited the Hoenn region more times than I can count. Specific areas like Rustboro City look genuinely gothic and carry far more character than in the original game. The specific art style helps you to appreciate the buildings as actual pieces of architecture within the game world rather than just basic polygons to fill the space. The water effects are particularly breathtaking, with a dazzling crystal aesthetic that works beautifully in a region as water heavy as Hoenn. The Pokemon sprites themselves are extremely colourful and give many familiar creatures a fresh sense of life and personality. Battle backgrounds shift to reflect your current surroundings, which is a small but welcome touch that reinforces how much care has gone into every corner of the presentation of this game. The soundtrack fits the art style well too. It complements the Game Boy Color aesthetic without feeling like an afterthought, and while I would never claim to be a musical expert, it does contribute meaningfully to the overall atmosphere. Quality of life and ease of play. This is one of Emerald Seaglass's strongest areas and one of the main reasons the game is so incredibly easy to recommend to anyone. The experience share is available very early in the game, which makes team building feel fluid and accessible throughout. Field moves have been introduced, meaning your Pokemon no longer need to learn HM moves to progress in the game world, and this also frees up move slots for actual team building. Difficulty modes are available, including level caps, which gives players control over how challenging they want the experience to be. You know me by this point, guys. I went for the easy mode. I just want to have a fun and simple experience to play through. There is also an in-game cheat code system accessed through the GameCube console in the player's bedroom, and this is also worth highlighting. Beyond the standard rare candies and master balls which you might expect from a system like this, there are codes to unlock starters from every generation which can be used from the very beginning of the game, as well as codes to enable mono-type Pokemon specifically for challenge runs in mind. That level of thoughtfulness for different playstyles is genuinely impressive and not something I have seen executed this well before. The one notable omission that I noticed is reusable TMs. Given how many modern quality of life features the game has already adopted, this did stand out to me as a missed opportunity, and I will return to it in the gripe section. Difficulty, story, and gameplay loop. Compared to the base Pokémon Emerald, the difficulty is slightly elevated, but this is not a difficulty hack by any stretch of the definition. The game is extremely accessible, and the various quality of life features ensure it stays that way throughout the entire experience. The story is largely faithful to the original Pokémon Emerald experience. There are some dialogue changes, and at the start of the game it is framed as though your character has recently moved from Johto to Hoenn, which ties in neatly with the Game Boy Color art style and adds a small layer of freshness to a very familiar opening. The core story beats remain the same, but for a hack that is not trying to rewrite the narrative, this feels entirely appropriate. What impressed me was the level of fan service woven throughout the game. There is a subtle but wonderful encounter in Fallible Town where you can meet Professor Elm from Johto, who rewards you if you have caught a certain number of Pokemon. He in fact gives you a spiky-eared Pichu, which in itself is an act of fan service, as not every fan will know about the spiky-eared Pichu and the events it has been involved in previous games. It's also completely in keeping with his character as a Pokemon professor. The encounter is completely optional and exactly the kind of detail that shows the developers genuinely care and love this series. One of the most interesting changes to the gameplay loop is the introduction of battle facilities as early as Slateport City. Being able to engage with rental Pokemon, earn battle points and claim rewards at that stage of the game rather than waiting until the post-game is a genuinely clever decision. It gives the mid-game a sense of variety and reward that most Pokemon games reserve until after the credits. I came away from Slateport with lots of full heals that were genuinely useful at that point in the game, and they weren't sold in the poker markets at that stage either. And the battles themselves were genuinely a lot of fun. Don't worry though, despite these changes, this is still Pokémon Emerald, and you can still capture a level 70 Rayquaza before the Elite Four and wipe the floor with them, which after all these years is still one of my favourite aspects about Pokémon Emerald. Pokémon roster and team building. There are around 430 Pokémon available in Emerald Seaglass, covering generations 1 to 3, along with later evolutions from subsequent generations, including later generations, for example, Annihilate and Cleavor. A small selection of newer generation Pokemon that appear to be personal favourites of the developer are also present, including Tinkaton and Applin. Team building is flexible and enjoyable. Several Pokemon have received type changes. For example, Yanmega is now classified as a Bug and Dragon type, rather than Bug and Flying. And new moves from later generations have been added throughout. The Fairy type is also included, and many learn sets have been updated, which make a wide range of Pokemon far more viable than they were in the original game. Building a well-rounded team feels genuinely rewarding rather than restrictive. The standout addition for team building is the Wishing Well in Rustboro City. This is an in-game, offline Wonder Trade system where you throw wishing stars, a new item introduced in the game, into the well and receive a random Pokemon in return. It adds real flexibility and replayability, and for anyone who enjoyed the Wonder Trade era of Generation 6, it will feel like a welcome return to those days of amazing Wonderlock runs. It also works well as a way to fill gaps in your team's type coverage when you cannot find what you are looking for through normal encounters on the standard routes. I also appreciated that the roster, while generous, is slightly smaller than some other ROM hacks. Routes feel reasonably spaced with encounters rather than overcrowded, which makes finding the Pokemon you actually want a much less frustrating experience, since the game stays within Hoenn rather than incorporating other regions. This restraint in the roster ultimately feels like the right call, even if it means you may not see all of your fan favorites. For those planning to optimize a team for the post-game and Battle Frontier, there is also an NPC in the Battle Frontier at the very start who will adjust your Pokemon's IVs and EVs for absolutely free, which is a thoughtful inclusion for players who want to push into competitive content without the usual grind. Post-game. The post-game in Emerald Seaglass is respectable and gives you plenty of reasons to keep playing after you beat the Elite Four. The Battle Frontier is fully available with all of its facilities, and given how much the game has already used battle content throughout the main story, arriving at the Frontier feels like a natural escalation rather than an abrupt shift in what the game is asking of you. There is also an extended legendary quest that begins after you defeat the Elite Four. Speaking to a sailor in Mossdeep City unlocks a series of tickets which you can take to the sailor in Lily Cove City or in Slateport, and these allow you to pursue legendaries and mythicals from Generation 1 to 3. These encounters feel special, and the questline is signposted well enough that it gives the postgame a clear sense of direction. My one frustration with this questline is the number of times you may be required to rebattle the Elite Four to trigger specific encounters. Certain legendary trios require you to defeat the Elite Four again to spawn each individual member of the trio. This applies to the Kanto legendary birds at the top of Mount Playa, the Johto legendary beasts in Shoal Cave, and the second Eon legendary in Southern Island. If you are not aware of this going in, you could find yourself rebattling the Elite Four 5 or 6 times just to complete this legendary quest, which does become just a little bit tedious. It is a minor structural issue in an otherwise enjoyable post-game, but worth knowing about before you start. Main gripes. 2 things stood out to me as genuine frustrations. The first is the TMs not being reusable. Given everything else the game does to modernize the experience, this omission is puzzling. It is the one area where the quality of life philosophy feels inconsistent with the rest of the game, and it does stand out because of how polished everything else is. The second one is the DexNav implementation. The DexNav was a cool feature in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and a big credit to the development team for attempting to bring it to life in the Generation 3 engine. However, in practice, the shaken grass and DexNav alerts disappears far too quickly to act on reliably. I assumed early on in the game that I was simply being too slow to react, but after completing the full game, I would estimate I successfully encountered fewer than 5% of the Pokemon the DexNav was trying to flag to me. It is not a feature that meaningfully affects the core experience of the game, but it is present enough in the game and your progression through every single route and cave to notice its limitations, and it's worth managing your expectations around this. This wouldn't be a fair review unless we cover the highlights, and believe me, there's an awful lot to choose from here. The art style is the headline, and it delivers completely. I genuinely did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did, and the impact it has on making the game feel so fresh after so many years with Hoenn simply cannot be overstated. Every screen, every battle, every route feels like something worth looking at. The quality of life features as a whole package are excellent. The experience share available early, the cheat code system, the field moves, the smaller reworked areas like Fortree City, which no longer requires climbing ladders to traverse, meaning you can move through it quickly. All of these things stack up, When you have been visiting the same region for over 2 decades, these additions, although they sound small, they genuinely change how enjoyable the experience is. The battle facilities in Slateport City are one of the most creative structural decisions in this hack. Having access to that kind of content mid-game rather than as a post-game reward is something more hacks should consider, especially for players that just enjoy battling. The Wishing Well is a fantastic concept and one of my favourite additions in any ROM hack in recent memories. It's also executed incredibly well. It adds replayability, flexibility, and a sense of fun that feels very in the spirit of what the best Pokemon experiences should feel like. The fan service throughout is handled with real care. The Professor Elm encounter, the early access to starters from every generation, the subtle dialogue changes that tie the narrative to Johto that fit with the art style. None of it overstays its welcome, and all of it adds to the experience in a really meaningful way. Verdict: Pokémon Emerald Seaglass is a genuinely brilliant ROM hack and one of the easiest recommendations I can make to you. The art style alone separates it and sets it apart from almost everything else in the genre. The quality of life features are thoughtfully implemented, the roster is well balanced, and it manages to make a region I have visited dozens of times feel exciting and worth exploring again. That is not easy to pull off, and Nemo622 deserves real credit for this. For the vast majority of Pokemon players, particularly those who love Hoenn or are looking for a beautiful and accessible adventure with modern features, this should be near the top of your list. That said, there are some caveats. If you are specifically looking for an ultimate difficulty hack, this is probably not what you want to focus on. The challenge is present and there are increased difficulty options, but the game is designed to be enjoyed rather than to significantly test you. If you are also someone who prefers ROM hacks set in entirely new regions with original stories, Emerald Seaglass stays very faithful to Hoenn and does not try to be something it is not. Therefore, you may find other hacks more enjoyable instead. My one honest observation is that despite how much I enjoyed it, Emerald Seaglass still falls just ever so slightly short of what I would call the definitive Hoenn experience. That title, in my personal opinion, still belongs to Pokemon Hyper Emerald, the Lost Artifact. That is a close call, and others will reasonably disagree, but if you have not played Hyper Emerald, it is worth seeking out alongside this one. I will say they are very different, and in some ways it does not feel fair to compare them, but I'm going to do that anyway because that's sort of the point of these opinionated videos. Ultimately, play it if you want a fresh, beautiful and well-crafted way to experience Hoenn with strong quality of life features and genuine replayability. Hold off if you are chasing extreme difficulty or an original story with a brand new region to explore. There are excellent hacks that deliver those things specifically, and this is in no way trying to compete with them. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you have any good recommendations for the next time I have a break during my on-calls.